Yeah.
The National Desk, America's News Now.
The Arctic assault across the United States continues with more than 200 million Americans in below average temperatures. Just ahead, what you need to know about wind chill warnings, power outages, and travel delays.
You're never going to have an opportunity to have your voice pack more of a punch than it is tonight.
Remember, today is the day we make history.
All eyes on Iowa. Republicans braving the below freezing temperatures to cast their votes in the Iowa caucuses. The latest from the first election of the 2024 political season as we take you live to Des Moines. Then the search continues for two Navy SEALs missing off the coast of Somalia. What we now know about their mission and what's involved in the ongoing search. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Amira David, and right now, extreme cold gripping most parts of the country, leaving around 100 million Americans under wind chill alerts. 41 states, to be exact, under some kind of weather alert today as heavy snow, wind, and ice sweep across much of the country. Dozens of temperature records were forecast to be broken today and tomorrow. At least 2 people, we understand, have tragically died because of this dangerous roads and conditions. More than 2,700 flights within, into, or out of the United States have been canceled today, according to FlightAware, and 7,400 others have been delayed. Chicago O'Hare, Dallas Fort Worth International, and Denver International had some of the most delays and cancellations. Power crews, meantime, they are on standby for outages. At one point today, more than 100,000 electric customers were without power in Oregon from winter storms, according to poweroutage.us. And right now, it's not looking too bad throughout most of the country, but that could change as this storm continues. The National Desk's Karina Vargas reports from Washington, where residents have been preparing for those outages.
Winds have definitely started to pick up all day, and when you combine that with the freezing temperatures, it's definitely best to stay indoors. Now, people we talked with today said that they've been preparing for these bitter temperatures by making sure they have all the supplies they need to stay warm. Many stopping by stores to pick up firewood and flashlights in case the power does go out. Now, we have been seeing some power outages on this side of town already, and those who live in Enumclaw said that they're used to being hit by strong winds and power outages. One woman told me that she's experienced times where the power was out for several days, and many we spoke with said that it's all about preparing for the worst.
I just came here and got my hand warmers for to keep my hands warm because I wasn't prepared for that, and toe warmers.
My generator is always ready, wrapping the pipes and making sure that that the water's ready. We have horses, and so out at the barn I have to make sure that my pipes are heated.
Puget Sound Energy said if there are power outages, they ask people to turn off their lights and appliances, use flashlights instead of candles, and never use a gas range or an indoor cooker for heating.
And we are now less than 2 hours away from the Iowa caucus, the first test of the 2024 presidential election. Republican voters are heading to polling locations right now, braving temperatures that could feel like negative 40 degrees in certain areas. Former President Trump, he is maintaining a large lead in recent polls as Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis remain in a close second. Iowa tonight could set the tone for the rest of the race. Iowans choosing which Republican they think can best challenge President Biden. But as Sinclair's chief political correspondent Scott Thuman shows us from Iowa, conditions on the ground and what'll be the coldest caucus on record, just one factor.
In frigid Iowa, where the feels-like temperature Monday plummeted to almost 30 below, there will be 2 big tests in the 2024 caucuses.
It's nasty out there.
One of Donald Trump's true strength, and the other a test of voters' resolve.
You can't sit home. If you're sick as a dog, you say, darling, I gotta make it. Even if you vote and then pass away, it's worth it. Look at the arms of that guy.
As for Trump, can his commanding lead really hold up? Not since Bob Dole in 1988, who won by 12 points, has any Republican scored a double-digit victory over their rivals. Polls say Trump's is almost 30. Meanwhile, Nikki Haley, slipping by Ron DeSantis for second place, says the momentum is all hers.
To me, the only numbers that matter are the ones that we're going up and everybody else went down.
As for the weather,
and if you're going out to caucus, this is going to be still some dangerous cold out there. Temperatures are going to stay below zero.
We could do a sitcom on this. This is taking a Florida family and dumping them in the middle of a blizzard in January.
So cold and roads so tricky, some of the campaigns are reportedly helping arrange rides for voters in 4x4s just to make sure they get to caucus sites, aware a poor showing could also freeze their chances in this race.
I'd rather speak the truth and lose this election than to win by playing some fake game of political snakes and ladders.
Now, back to former President Trump. He has often boasted that his supporters would do almost anything for him. Well, between an overall lack of voter enthusiasm and, of course, this tough weather, we'll see how true that is tonight. Amira?
And Scott, if it turns out that the weather does, in fact, keep people away, who does that hurt or maybe help?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. Initially, you would think that because when polling is put across the board, it usually shows that Trump's supporters have the most enthusiasm for him compared to others. However, there is the chance that a lot of them tonight look at the weather conditions, they look at the poll numbers and see that Trump is up anywhere between 25 and 30 points, and they say, if I'm going to stay home, this is the night I can do it because he's already in such a good position here in Iowa. That would then shrink the gap between he and second place, whoever that may be. But we'll have to wait and see if that holds true. Iowans tell me they're showing up no matter what.
Have to wait and see how it plays out. As you just said, Scott, thank you so much from Des Moines, Iowa. And the coverage from Iowa continues in just a few minutes, where we're going to get a closer look at voters' take on the biggest issues. And less than a day after launching an anti-ship cruise missile toward an American destroyer in the Red Sea, Houthi rebels have fired another missile, striking a U.S.-owned cargo ship in the Gulf of Aden, threatening to further escalate the ongoing war in the Middle East. And tonight, questions over how the U.S. and the U.K. might respond to this. Remember, joint strikes from the two countries hit several Houthi targets in Yemen last Thursday, which that joint task force said was in response to several separate attacks from Houthi militias on cargo ships in the Red Sea. Tonight, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak defending his decision, calling it limited, but vowing to respond when needed.
The threats to shipping must cease. Illegally detained vessels and crews must be released, and we remain prepared to back our words with actions.
This as the Israel-Hamas war now reaches a grim 100-day milestone, now the longest war between Israelis and Palestinians since the State of Israel was created 75 years ago. Tonight, the death toll, according to authorities in Hamas-run Gaza, has now surpassed 24,000 as UN agencies call urgently for more aid to ward off the threat of famine and disease outbreaks. It comes as Israeli forces carry out fresh airstrikes across the Gaza Strip. Israel's military says its operations killed 5 militants. The White House calling on Israel to scale back its offensive as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vows to keep fighting. And events are happening across the country in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. on this holiday. Many D.C. area residents braved the snow this morning to celebrate and commemorate the life of civil rights icon MLK. The annual MLK Holiday D.C. Peace and Walk Parade happened today, marking 45 years since the first MLK parade was held following the assassination of Dr. King on April 14, 1968. Many groups held signs calling for political change and accountability. A wreath laying honored Dr. King at the MLK Memorial in D.C. This year, the holiday also happens to fall on King's actual birthday. Most non-essential government services were closed today, and USPS is not delivering any mail. Most major stores are still open, as are the national parks, offering free admission.
As Dr. King wrote in the letter from Birmingham jail, the goal of America is freedom. And so we gather this afternoon to honor his legacy.
And that was Vice President Kamala Harris speaking today at the South Carolina NAACP Martin Luther King Day event in Columbia. She went on to say that right now freedom is under significant threat in this country. President Biden was volunteering, meantime, in Philadelphia at Philabundance today, a nonprofit food bank serving the area. This is the third year in a row President Biden has volunteered to assist the charity on MLK Day. A pattern of swatting incidents continues. The White House, one of the latest targets. Several fire and EMS units were sent there this morning after a 911 call claiming there was a fire. Officials determined the call was from a fake number and that there was no emergency. President Biden was not at the White House at the time. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, he is now out of the hospital. He was there for more than 2 weeks to treat complications from surgery for prostate cancer. Several lawmakers have called on Austin to step down in the recent days since he did not alert the Biden administration or its senior leaders. For weeks, President Biden is sticking by his defense secretary, and there are no plans for further cancer treatment. Investigators are trying to understand what caused a deadly hot air balloon crash in Arizona yesterday. The balloon crashed right after a group of skydivers jumped out, as they planned to do. 4 other passengers died and a 5th was seriously hurt. The National Transportation Safety Board believes there was some kind of problem with the envelope. Suspected serial killer Rex Ohrman is due in court tomorrow, and he is expected to be charged with a 4th killing. That's according to CNN, citing a source familiar with the case. The Suffolk County District Attorney also said a major development will be announced. Ohrman has been charged with murdering 3 women and is the primary suspect in the death of another, and he has pleaded not guilty. Coming up, the numbers are out. A fundraising blitz. Just how much President Biden's campaign now has to play with entering a hotly contested election year. Then on MLK Day, many choosing acts of service in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Ahead, the one thing health experts are urging you to do to help save a life. And later, a doomed mission to the moon. What happened to this moon lander that impeded its journey, and what we know about whether it'll pose a safety risk as it re-enters the Earth. Tonight, voters in Iowa will be the first in the nation to have their say in the presidential primary. Republicans and some independents are heading to caucus locations across the state's 99 counties. Campaigns are urging their supporters to turn out despite the brutally cold temperatures. National correspondent Atral Nashar reports from Iowa.
Caucus day in Iowa, the coldest on record. Campaigns nervous the double-digit negative wind chills and snowy roads would keep voters home. But if you ask these Iowans,
people still like to go out and go for events and all that.
Do you think the roads and the snow are going to keep people home, the cold weather?
I do not.
No? How come?
I think it's still important.
We're from Iowa. We've grown up in this.
Taking their role as the first in the nation to vote seriously.
I've listened to several of the candidates over the last several months, and as of yesterday, decided on President Trump.
Still, because of the weather, the Iowa Republican Party says it has no expectations for record turnout. But here's what some voters told me is driving them to the polls.
I think the biggest thing is the economy and the border are two of my biggest issues.
The economy. Yeah.
Prices.
Groceries the most.
Yeah.
Terrible. Expensive.
Yeah.
So that's what's driving me.
Iowa Republican Congresswoman Ashley Hinson represents Northeast Iowa, and though she's campaigned with the candidates, she's not made a formal endorsement.
We are presenting, as Republicans, a contrast in what our future for America looks like.
Based on the polls, it's likely that contrast will look like former President Trump and President Biden at the top of the ballot in November. Do you think it's set in stone for him?
Well, I certainly think that there is a lot of enthusiasm for President Trump on the ground here in Iowa, and why wouldn't there be? What I think is important is no matter who the nominee is, Iowans are going to rally and we're going to get behind a Republican nominee because we understand, again, what's at stake here.
Iowa giving the nation a first glimpse at where the Republican Party stands. In Ankeny, Iowa, I'm Atral Nashar reporting.
Atra, thank you. And results tonight are expected around 8:45 Eastern. Stick with us as we continue our in-depth coverage on the issue. We're going to be bringing you the latest election updates throughout the evening on later editions of the National Desk and online at thenationaldesk.com. New filings show President Biden's re-election campaign raised over $97 million in contributions in the fourth quarter. Together, Biden and Vice President Harris have $117 million of cash for their campaign. Biden's campaign says online fundraising is critical for their strategy. GOP frontrunner Donald Trump has not released his fourth quarter fundraising totals yet. And tonight, the status of two missing U.S. Navy SEALs remains unknown. The Washington Post reports the SEALs were on a mission to search for Iranian weaponry being sent to Houthi rebels in Yemen. They were last seen on Thursday in the Gulf of Aden when high waves knocked one into the sea. The other SEAL jumped in after him. U.S. officials say that the waters are warm and that SEALs are trained for such emergencies, but they remain unfound at this point. Navy ships, helicopters, and drones are involved in the ongoing search. A second defamation trial against Donald Trump begins tomorrow, focusing on further damages Trump could owe columnist E. Jean Carroll. It comes after a jury found Trump sexually abused Carroll back in the 90s. Trump is planning to testify, and a federal judge said Trump could wait until next week to accommodate his schedule, even if the trial is over by this Thursday. And the government of Iceland is working to respond after lava from an active volcano burned 3 houses in Grindavik yesterday. Residents were ordered to evacuate this weekend when volcanic fissures damaged roads. Officials are looking for apartments to house displaced locals as they plan for a continued threat to the area, and it's not clear when residents will be able to return to their homes. Right now in Buffalo, New York, the Buffalo Bills-Pittsburgh Steelers matchup is at halftime. That game, originally scheduled for Sunday, was postponed due to dangerous weather in the Buffalo area. A massive lake-effect snowstorm pounded the region, with snow totals exceeding 2 feet in several areas in and around Buffalo. And take a look at this. The Bills posting a photo of their football stadium this morning as they work to clear the snow asking for shovelers, in fact, to come and help clear the stands, paying them $20 an hour to get the job done. Well, many are choosing to take part in acts of service today in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. As medical reporter Liz Bonus explains, one activity that healthcare providers are hoping especially young people will consider: donating blood.
Those tracking our blood supply say the number of people who donate blood has dropped 40% in the past 2 decades. And in younger people, those numbers even worse. In fact, a new survey on blood collection from the Department of Health and Human Services shows between 2019 and 2021, blood donations in people ages 16 to 18 dropped by 60%. Well, nobody is quite sure why. When I joined Dr. David O for his podcast recently called In the Know with Dr. O, we did talk about this.
The younger generation is so much more about giving and community service and stuff. We have not seen them yet come out in big numbers that we were hoping for.
But he says blood drives, such as this one at Ohio's National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, can help change that. Those who give say they feel a sense of community and that they are part of something bigger.
It's such an easy way to help people. It's fun. They have great prizes if you're into prizes, and it's really easy to help people.
My niece had sickle cell, so every chance I get, donating in memory of her.
Now, a few other things may have contributed to this drop in younger donors in those years. COVID did shut down many high school and college drives. And remember, to donate, you just need to be healthy, weigh at least 110 pounds, and be 17 years old or 16 with a parent's permission. With your health news, I'm Liz Bonus reporting.
All right, Liz, thank you. A lunar lander will be going up in flames soon after a failed attempt to reach the moon. U.S.-based Astrobotic Technology said the Peregrine lander is on its way back, and the mission will likely be over on Thursday. The company had to cancel its mission last week after Peregrine developed a fuel leak. Experts say there shouldn't be a safety risk as it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere. So that's always good news. And coming up, how officials are asking residents of one state to prepare for severe winter weather that could continue for days. We'll be right back. We have reporters all across the country covering the issues that matter most to you. We are taking the pulse of America, and we start with a fiery car crash leaving Washington state drivers concerned about road conditions.
State Patrol and law enforcement do this sort of thing on a daily basis. That doesn't make it any easier, especially when you have multiple fatalities at a single scene.
Law enforcement towed away a scorched 2017 SUV police say smashed into a pillar.
One passenger was ejected and died on scene. The vehicle itself burst into flames, and all 4 that remained in the vehicle also died at the scene.
Washington State Patrol's Director of Communications tells us the agency in its initial investigation does not yet have the cause for the horrible scene.
It's easy to think, well, the temperatures are so low, there's been ice and snow in the area and that so forth. But from what we can tell, again, the roadway was dry and bare.
WSP did not have crash data for this area, but warns of the dangers here because of it being heavily traveled near the mall and other businesses.
With winds whipping, rain pouring, and high tide looming, city crews prepared for the worst to come Saturday morning.
This is our vulnerable area. It tends to flood quite often on any sunny day type flooding, and in storms like this, it'll flood constantly. So we are prepared to shut it down when needed.
Even roads away from the waterfront weren't spared. Marginal Way was underwater for several blocks, with exits at the Franklin Street arterial closed.
And we saw a drain back here that was just bubbling up like a geyser.
Drivers tried to get their cars to dry ground, but some didn't get the memo. What was it like when you pulled in here?
It was not this bad.
It's a mixed bag of emotions.
It's definitely not your typical January, I'd say that for sure.
And it will take all day to get to all the locations.
Depending on weather events, they may need to reapply the salt and sand to roads. News Channel 9's Storm Track team says after the winter storm passes and precipitation ends, bitterly cold temperatures could leave us below freezing until later in the week. But both the city and TDOT advise drivers to stay home if possible.
The best thing to do is to stay home with the weather events that we're getting ready to have happen if they can.
Tonight is the 75th Primetime Emmy Awards. This Emmy Awards show 4 months later than usual due to the strikes from both the Actors and Writers Guilds. HBO dominated this year with 3 of the most nominated shows this year: Succession, The White Lotus, and The Last of Us. Actor and comedian Anthony Anderson is hosting, so it should be a really good time. Looking forward. That does it for this edition of the National Desk. Thank you so much for watching.